What's going on, guys? Today we're back at it with another career retrospective, and we're going to keep it going with the Contender Series episodes with fighters that have been signed by the UFC. And today we're talking about one of the most recent LFA middleweight champion, Brandon Allen, who won his Contender Series fight in the first round and secured himself a contract with the UFC on the fourth episode. The LFA middleweight champions have had a good luck at finding their way into the UFC, and Allen is the fifth to ink a deal with the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Eric Anders was the first, debuting in July of 2017, and was followed shortly that same year by Marcus Perez in December. Anthony Hernandez and Ian Heinisch both got fights on the second season of the Contender Series, and both won in the first round, and both would fight in the UFC by now. Allen, the most recent LFA middleweight champion, would be the last to make it into the UFC, and that would be coming off his Contender Series win this season in 2019. But for career retrospectives, we always take a look at the beginning, and we're going to start that episode right now. Let's get right into it. So let's start Allen starting his career as an amateur in 2015. At only 20 years old, he'd take 5 fights in the span of 2 months. 2 would come on May 5th and May 7th, so in 2 days, he'd have 2 fights, while 3 would be held July 6th, 9th, and the 11th. In his 3 July amateur fights, had won a gold medal in the middleweight division at the IMMAF World Championships. It's a pretty popular amateur fighting world championship where they get fighters from around the world, amateur fighters from around the world, and they pit them up against each other for experience. And they're kind of under big lights in this situation, and Allen would win a gold medal the year he would compete. Allen would win all 5 of his amateur fights and stop 4 of the 5 opponents on way to turning pro that same year in August 2015. He would take a fight with the World Fighting Championship in his home state of Louisiana, and he'd debut at only 20 years old and stop his opponent in the very first round. 5 months later, to open 2016, he'd fight again in the WFC with a similar first-round finish result. These first 2 fights were pretty brutal. Allen worked inside the clinch until he rocked and or took his opponent down, and by the end of both fights, he left his opponents in a bloody mess. The Rufus Sport, he trains at Rufus Sport. The Rufus Sport athlete would have really dominated in his debut fights. However, in his third pro fight, he'd take a leap in competition. In a fight between 2 fast-rising prospects, Allen would be matched up with the 4-0 Trevin Giles. This fight would be the first of Allen's opponents that would have a future in the UFC. For this fight, Allen would be fighting under a bigger umbrella with the Legacy Fighting Championship holding an event in Louisiana. In a back-and-forth fight I recommend you go and watch, I'll put the link on screen now, Allen rocked Giles early in round 1. Allen got the fight to the ground and attacked a rear naked choke, which was reversed by Giles to get on top into full guard. The fight didn't stay stagnant. Allen quickly began fishing for an arm bar and then a knee bar, all while Giles landed a lot of damage with hammer fists and other sorts of ground and pound. At the end of the round, both guys were visibly tired. However, Allen, coming out and getting rocked in the second round, Allen fell to his back and Giles poured on pressure to punch Allen into a rear naked choke, which would ultimately signal the end and Allen's first loss. According to an interview, however, with the Combat Press, let me also mention at the time, Allen was also juggling the pursuit of a criminal justice degree at Southern Louisiana University, training and working with his father in construction and real estate. Allen, however, after suffering his first loss as a professional, would bounce right back into the cage 2 months later. Allen would use 2016 and the motivation off the loss to win 4 straight that year, putting his record on the year to 5-1. To open 2017, Allen would take on John Kirk, and in this fight, Allen opened Kirk up with a knee, worked into a choke to dominant position on the ground, and then elbowed Kirk until the blood absolutely covered the canvas. This dominant, and I say dominant performance would land Allen an LFA middleweight world title shot against the then champion and now UFC fighter, Eric Anders. Anders, at this moment, entering his prime at 30 years old, would have a 9-year age advantage against the 21-year-old Brandon Allen. In a fight that went all 5 of the 5 scheduled rounds, Anders dropped Allen early, and the two had a back-and-forth battle with both fighting fatigue throughout. Anders successfully defended his middleweight title on the night and shortly departed for the UFC after. This would leave a vacancy at the top of the middleweight division in the LFA, so Allen would be booked in a bounce-back fight again only 2 months later, which he won in the second round via triangle choke. This again set him up for an LFA middleweight title fight against undefeated global knockout middleweight Anthony Hernandez to open 2018 on the January 26th LFA card. Again, with the title and a UFC tryout on the line, Allen would come up short on the end of another decision, and Hernandez would go on to sign with the UFC in June of 2018, and the belt would go up for grabs once again. Ian Heinisch would be the next to grab the belt after being promoted to the undisputed champion following his interim title win over Gabriel Checo in the LFA. However, instead of fighting in the LFA for his next fight, he'd also be scooped up by the UFC, and again, the middleweight championship would be left vacated. Allen would headline his third event for the LFA on August, LFA 43. His opponent, Larry Crow, who was coming off a win in his return fight after having fights canceled and injuries holding him out for 2 years. The fight would decide the next challenger in line for another LFA middleweight title. Crow came out guns blazing, and Allen, coming off a loss, wasn't letting the opportunity slip. Landing a left hook counter, Allen put Crow away in the first round. This fight marking Allen's 7th first-round finish, and he would get another shot at the title. Allen's opponent for the strap would be undefeated Tim Hiley, coming off back-to-back wins in the LFA. And in the main event of the LFA's historic 50th event, Brandon Allen showed off his improved stand-up and landed one of the most beautifully timed knees, ducking a Hiley left hook and landing it square on Hiley's jaw. In a fight that looked like it might have gone the distance, that knee helped Allen secure a rear naked choke finish and the elusive LFA middleweight title. Allen wouldn't vacate for the UFC immediately like former LFA middleweight champions. After winning the belt, he'd defend his belt on LFA 61 against 8-1 Moses Moreta via unanimous decision and finally earn a shot on the Contender Series. For the Contender Series episode, he would take on 6-1 Aaron Jeffrey in the opener for the Contender Series. Allen carried calmness into the octagon and finished Jeffrey in the first round, making Dana go against his rule of signing young fighters, Allen only being 23 off the Contender Series, and Allen landed a contract with the UFC. Now landing a contract with the UFC, Brandon Allen has had a fight scheduled. Brandon Allen will take on Eric Spicely, who just came off a fight of the night performance against Daniel Cormier's protege, Deron Wynn. So Brandon Allen will get his UFC shot on a Boston card, I believe. I believe he'll be fighting in Boston, and we're going to get to see how this guy is going to do against UFC-level competition. Now, it's going to be a very, very interesting fight. Spicely and Allen are pretty even on the feet, both guys. Spicely better chin. I think Allen's got tighter stand-up. And then on the ground, it's jiu-jitsu versus a superior wrestler with good ground and pound in Allen. It should be an extremely fun fight and a good test for Brandon Allen. And that's the career of all-in Brandon Allen. Make sure you guys like the video if you enjoyed this update and this identification of a superstar that might be. And I'm going to almost guarantee that by the end of this guy's career, we'll see him holding the UFC middleweight title. Let me remind you that he's only 23 years old, and he's a pretty marketable personality and look for the UFC. So I think that he's going to have a very, very bright future, mark my words. But for today, that's it on Brandon Allen. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, remember to smash that like button and subscribe to Combat Sports Central for all things combat sports. But that'll end it for today. Peace out, guys.